I realized I had been erased the moment I saw the table and my name wasn't there. It was my grandson Ethan's 7th birthday, the kind of afternoon I used to spend weeks preparing for, the kind where I would bake from scratch, wrap gifts with care, and arrive early just to make sure everything felt perfect. The backyard was full of laughter, balloons tied to white chairs, a long table set with bright paper plates and neatly folded napkins, each seat marked with a name in careful handwriting. I paused at the entrance, scanning the table slowly, expecting to find my place somewhere near Ethan, maybe beside my son Daniel like it used to be. I looked once. Then again. Every chair had a name. Every single one except mine. I stood there longer than I should have, holding the gift bag in my hand, the tissue paper rustling softly in the breeze, as if it was the only thing acknowledging I was still there. Then Ashley walked up behind me, her heels clicking lightly against the patio stones, her voice sweet in a way that always felt rehearsed. "Oops, looks like we forgot you," she said with a small smile, the kind that never quite reached her eyes. A few guests nearby chuckled politely, as if it were just a harmless oversight, something easily brushed aside. I nodded. I even smiled back. "It's all right," I said quietly, though no one had really asked. I didn't make a scene. I didn't question her. I simply stepped away from the table and moved toward the edge of the yard, near the fence where the shadows stretched longer and the noise softened into something distant. I watched as everyone settled into their seats, plates clinking, drinks being passed around, Ashley moving gracefully between them like she belonged at the center of it all. Ethan ran past me once, laughing, not noticing I hadn't sat down, not noticing anything was wrong. And why would he? He was 7. This was his day. I told myself that as I stood there, that none of this was meant to hurt me, that it was just an oversight, a small mistake in a busy afternoon. But something about the way Ashley had said it, the ease in her voice, the quick glance she shared with one of her friends, made that explanation feel too simple. Too convenient. I leaned against the fence, folding my hands together, letting the wood press lightly against my back. I had seen small things before. Moments that didn't quite add up. Invitations that arrived late. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Family photos posted online where I somehow never appeared. At the time, I told myself I was imagining it. That families changed. That roles shifted. That I needed to adjust. But standing there, watching my own family celebrate just a few feet away while I remained unplaced, unnamed, something inside me settled into a quiet, uncomfortable clarity. This wasn't the first time. It was just the first time it had been so visible. So deliberate. I didn't step forward. I didn't ask for a chair. I didn't pull anyone aside. I stayed exactly where I was, observing, listening, letting the afternoon unfold without me. And as I did, I began to notice the details I had ignored before. The way Ashley directed where everyone sat. The way Daniel followed her lead without question. The way decisions seemed to happen around me, never with me. I wasn't part of the table anymore. Not by accident. By design. And for the first time, I didn't feel confused about it. I felt certain. I stayed by the fence long after everyone had taken their seats, long enough for the rhythm of the party to settle into something predictable, something I could observe without being seen. Children laughed as they ran across the yard, their shoes brushing against the grass, their voices rising and falling in bursts of excitement. Plates were passed around, drinks were poured, and conversations blended into a soft hum that never quite reached me. No one called my name. No one asked where I was sitting. It was as if the absence had already been accepted, quietly agreed upon without needing to be spoken aloud. I shifted the gift bag in my hands and placed it carefully on a small side table near the fence, smoothing the tissue paper even though no one was watching. I did not want it to look abandoned. I did not want anything about me to look like it had been forgotten, even if I had been. From where I stood, I could see Ashley clearly. She moved from one group to another with practiced ease, laughing at the right moments, adjusting decorations that did not need adjusting, making sure everything looked effortless. At one point, she leaned closer to a woman seated near the center of the table, lowering her voice just enough to suggest privacy, but not enough to prevent it from carrying on the breeze. "I told him it would be easier this way," she said, her tone light, almost amused. The other woman nodded, glancing briefly in my direction before looking away again. I kept my eyes steady, not reacting, not moving, letting the moment pass over me like a quiet wave. Easier. The word settled somewhere deep, heavier than it should have been. I thought about all the times I had tried to make things easier for them. The years I had helped with rent when Daniel was starting out. The weekends I had spent watching Ethan so they could have time to themselves. The holidays I had hosted, the meals I had cooked, the small adjustments I had made without ever being asked. I had always believed that effort would build something lasting, something that could not be undone by a single afternoon. But standing there, I began to understand that effort could also be erased, slowly, carefully, until it no longer existed in the version of the story they chose to tell. I watched as Daniel sat beside Ashley, nodding along to something she was saying, his expression relaxed, comfortable, as if everything was exactly as it should be. He did not look around for me. He did not seem to notice the empty space where I should have been. That was the part that stayed with me, more than the missing chair, more than the comment that drew a few quiet laughs. It was the absence of acknowledgement, the quiet acceptance that I did not belong at that table anymore. I turned my gaze toward the house, its windows reflecting the afternoon light, the place I had once helped make into a home. I remembered signing papers years ago, trusting that it would give Daniel stability, that it would give his family a place to grow. I had never asked for anything in return. Not recognition. Not control. Just a sense of connection, a place within the family I believed we were building together. And yet, here I was, standing outside of it, quite literally, as if the boundaries had been redrawn without my knowledge. I folded my hands again, this time more firmly, grounding myself in the stillness I had learned to rely on. I did not need to confront anyone to understand what was happening. The evidence was all around me, in the small decisions, the quiet exchanges, the careful exclusions. I had not been forgotten. I had been moved aside. And as that realization settled into something solid and undeniable, I felt a shift within myself, not loud or sudden, but steady, like a door closing without a sound. I remained by the fence until the moment the cake was brought out, the candles already lit, small flames flickering against the afternoon light as if they were eager to be noticed, eager to be celebrated in a way I no longer was. Everyone gathered closer to the table then, chairs scraping lightly against the ground, voices rising with anticipation. Someone called Ethan's name, and he ran to the center, his face bright, unaware of anything beyond the joy of being surrounded. I took a step forward without thinking, then stopped myself just as quickly. There was no space for me there. Not physically, and not in any way that mattered. So I stayed where I was, watching from a distance that felt larger than the few yards between us. "Make a wish," Ashley said, her voice carrying clearly, warm and inviting, the kind of tone that suggested everything was exactly as it should be. Ethan closed his eyes, the candles reflecting in the brief stillness, and everyone leaned in, smiling, waiting for that small moment to pass. I wondered what he wished for. Children always wished for simple things. Toys. Games. More birthdays just like this one. They never imagined the quiet shifts that happened around them, the invisible decisions that shaped who belonged and who did not. He blew out the candles, and applause followed, quick and automatic. Phones were raised. Pictures were taken. Memories were captured from angles that did not include me. I noticed that too. The way people positioned themselves, instinctively forming a frame that excluded anything unnecessary. I was no longer necessary. I let that thought settle without resistance. It did not sting the way it might have before. It clarified things. It stripped away the last layer of uncertainty I had been holding on to. A little later, as the cake was being cut and passed around, I heard my name again, but not in the way I once had. "Did she bring anything?" someone asked quietly, not unkindly, just curious. I think so, Ashley replied, her voice low but steady. She left it over there. She did not look at me when she said it. She gestured vaguely toward the side table where I had placed the gift, as if it were just another item to be accounted for, not something chosen with care, not something tied to years of being present in ways that could not be measured. I watched as one of the guests walked over, picked up the bag, and brought it to the table. Ashley opened it quickly, her movements efficient, her smile unchanged. "Oh, this is nice," she said, holding up the box just long enough for a few people to see before setting it aside. No pause. No acknowledgement. No connection drawn between the gift and the person who had given it. It was handled like everything else that afternoon, smoothly, without disruption, without drawing attention to anything that might complicate the picture she was maintaining. I exhaled slowly, not out of disappointment, but out of recognition. This was not about oversight. It was not about a busy host forgetting to set one more place at the table. It was a pattern, carefully maintained, reinforced in small ways that added up over time until they formed something solid, something intentional. I looked at Daniel again, just once more, giving myself that final check, that last chance to see something different. He was laughing at something someone had said, his hand resting lightly on the back of Ashley's chair, his posture relaxed, settled into a life that no longer required my presence. He did not search the yard. He did not notice the distance. Or if he did, he chose not to close it. That was enough for me. I did not need a conversation. I did not need an explanation. Everything I needed to understand was already there, laid out as clearly as the empty space where my name should have been. I stepped away from the fence then, not toward the table, but toward the side of the house, my steps measured, unhurried. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. The sound of the party continued behind me, unchanged, as if my movement had not altered anything at all. And in a way, it had not. The change had already happened. It had been happening for a long time. I was only just allowing myself to see it fully. I walked along the side of the house slowly, my hand brushing lightly against the siding as if I needed something steady to remind myself that I was still part of something real, even if it no longer included them. The noise of the party softened with each step, fading into a distant hum that no longer demanded my attention. I reached the back corner where the yard met the driveway, a place just far enough away to be forgotten but close enough to still hear fragments of conversation carried by the wind. I paused there, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to understand one more thing before I left. Voices drifted toward me, clearer now without the distraction of laughter and music. Ashley's voice was unmistakable, calm, controlled, the same tone she used when she was explaining something she had already decided. "I told you, it is better this way," she said, her words measured, almost patient. There was a brief silence before Daniel responded, his voice lower, less certain. "I just do not want it to look bad." Ashley let out a soft breath, the kind that sounded like reassurance wrapped in quiet authority. "It does not. People understand. She would not fit in with this group anyway." I stood very still, the words settling into place with a precision that left no room for doubt. There was no anger in me, no sudden surge of emotion, just a slow, steady clarity that felt almost unfamiliar. I had spent years interpreting small moments, trying to decide if I was overthinking, if I was reading too much into things that could be explained away. But this was not subtle. This was not something that could be misunderstood. It was simple. Direct. Final. I looked down at my hands, noticing how steady they were, how calm everything felt despite the weight of what I had just heard. I thought about the first time Ashley came into our lives, how carefully I had welcomed her, how I had made space for her in ways that felt natural at the time. I remembered inviting her into my kitchen, showing her the recipes Daniel loved. As a child, telling her stories that I thought would help her feel connected. I had believed that sharing those things would create something lasting, something that would grow over time. Instead, it seemed I had only been giving her a map, showing her exactly where I stood so she could decide how to move me aside. The realization did not come with bitterness. It came with a quiet acceptance that surprised me with its steadiness. I lifted my gaze back toward the house, watching as a few guests moved in and out, carrying plates, refilling drinks, continuing a celebration that no longer included me in any meaningful way. I thought about the papers I had signed years ago, the trust one had placed in Daniel, the belief that what I was building would remain shared, protected by something deeper than convenience. I had never questioned it. I had never needed to. Until now. A car drove past slowly on the street, its tires humming against the pavement, a reminder that the world outside this yard continued without pause, without concern for what had just shifted inside me. I straightened slightly, adjusting my coat even though it did not need adjusting, a small gesture that helped mark the moment. I was not leaving in anger. I was not leaving in defeat. I was leaving with understanding. And that made all the difference. I took one last look toward the backyard, toward the table where my name had never been placed, and then I turned toward the driveway, my steps even, my pace unhurried. No one called after me. No one noticed. And for the first time that afternoon, that absence did not feel like a loss. It felt like confirmation. The drive home was quiet in a way that felt different from before, not heavy, not filled with questions, but steady, like something had finally settled into its proper place. I kept my hands firm on the steering wheel, my eyes on the road ahead, letting the rhythm of the passing streetlights guide me forward without distraction. For years, I had driven that same route with a sense of anticipation, thinking about what I would bring next time, what I could do to make things easier for them, how I could stay connected in ways that felt natural and supportive. That night, there was none of that. Just clarity. When I pulled into my driveway, the house greeted me with its familiar stillness, the porch light casting a soft glow across the steps, unchanged, unaffected by anything that had happened a few miles away. I stepped inside and closed the door gently behind me, placing my keys in the same small dish by the entrance, the sound soft but final. I did not turn on the television. I did not check my phone. I simply walked into the kitchen and set my purse down on the counter, taking a moment to look around at the space I had built over the years, the place where every decision had been mine, where nothing had been arranged without my knowing. It felt different now, not because it had changed, but because I had. I moved toward the cabinet and took out a folder I had not opened in a long time, its edges slightly worn, its contents carefully organized in a way that reflected the habits I had always relied on. Inside were documents I had signed years ago, agreements I had trusted without hesitation, believing they would support the family I thought we were building together. I placed the folder on the table and opened it slowly, one page at a time, reading each line with a level of attention I had not given them before. Names. Dates. Signatures. Details I had once skimmed now stood out with quiet importance. I traced a line of text with my finger, pausing when I reached the section that outlined ownership, the part that defined who held what, who controlled what, and under what conditions those things could change. I remembered the day I had signed it, how confident I had felt, how certain I had been that trust was enough. At the time, it had seemed simple. Daniel needed stability. His family needed a home. I had the means to help, and I did not hesitate. I never imagined that one day I would be standing outside that very home, uninvited to sit at a table I had helped make possible. I sat down then, the chair steady beneath me, the paper still in my hands, and allowed myself a single, quiet breath. Not regret. Not anger. Just recognition. The kind that comes when something long ignored finally reveals itself completely. I reached for my reading glasses, placing them carefully on my face, and continued going through the documents with a focus that felt new, precise, intentional. There were clauses I had overlooked. Conditions I had trusted others to handle. Details that, when viewed together, formed a structure I now understood in a way I had not before. Nothing had been taken from me. Not yet. But everything had been positioned in a way that could allow it. That was the part that mattered. That was the part one could change. I closed the folder gently, aligning the edges before setting it back on the table, my hand resting on top of it for a moment longer than necessary. The house was quiet around me, the kind of quiet that did not ask for anything, did not demand a response. I stood up slowly, carrying the folder with me as I walked toward the hallway, already knowing what I would do next, not as a reaction to what had happened that afternoon, but as a response to what I had finally understood. For the first time in a long while, the path ahead did not feel uncertain. It felt clear. The next morning arrived without urgency, the sunlight filtering through my kitchen window in the same quiet way it always had, as if nothing in the world had shifted overnight. I stood by the sink for a moment, holding my coffee in both hands, watching the light stretch across the countertop, steady and predictable. It reminded me of something I had always relied on, something that did not change just because people did. I set the cup down and reached for my phone, scrolling briefly before stopping at a name I had not needed to call in years. Mr. Collins. He had handled my paperwork before, back when everything felt simple, back when trust had been enough to carry decisions forward without question. I hesitated for only a second before pressing the call button, listening as the line rang, each tone marking a step I had already decided to take. When he answered, his voice was calm, professional, unchanged. "Margaret, it has been a while," he said. I could hear the faint shuffle of papers in the background, the quiet order of an office that still operated on precision and detail. "It has," I replied, my tone even, measured. "I would like to review some documents. Today, if possible." There was a brief pause, not of confusion, but of adjustment, as if he was shifting his schedule in his mind. "Of course," he said. "Come in this afternoon. I will make time." I thanked him and ended the call, placing the phone back on the counter with a sense of finality that did not feel rushed or uncertain. I moved through the house with purpose then, gathering the folder from the night before, adding a few additional documents I had not looked at in years, each one representing a decision made under different assumptions, different expectations. By the time I stepped outside, the air was crisp, carrying that early morning clarity that made everything feel sharper, more defined. The drive to his office was familiar, a route I had taken before under very different circumstances, but this time there was no sense of obligation attached to it, no underlying desire to protect anyone else's comfort. This was mine to handle. When I arrived, the building looked exactly as I remembered, understated, orderly, the kind of place where details mattered and nothing was overlooked unless someone chose to overlook it. I stepped inside and was greeted by the quiet hum of work being done, phones ringing softly, papers being organized, conversations held in low, controlled tones. Mr. Collins met me at the doorway of his office, offering a polite smile, one that carried recognition without unnecessary familiarity. "Please, come in," he said, gesturing toward the chair across from his desk. I sat down, placing the folder carefully in front of me, aligning it with the edge of the desk before opening it. I did not rush. I did not explain everything at once. I simply turned the folder toward him and began with a single sentence. "I would like to understand exactly what I signed, and what control I still have." He nodded, his expression sharpening slightly, shifting from polite acknowledgement to focused attention. He adjusted his glasses and began reviewing the documents, his eyes moving steadily across each page, occasionally pausing, occasionally making a small note. I watched him in silence, allowing the process to unfold without interruption, trusting that clarity would come from precision, not from emotion. After a few minutes, he looked up, his gaze direct, thoughtful. "You have more control than you may think," he said carefully. "But it depends on what you are willing to change." I held his gaze for a moment, letting the words settle, not reacting immediately, not questioning them. Then I nodded once, a small, deliberate movement that carried more certainty than anything I had said the day before. "Then let us change it," I replied, my voice calm, steady, and entirely my own. Mr. Collins did not rush me after I said it, and I appreciated that more than I expected. He simply nodded once, then turned back to the documents, pulling a clean sheet of paper toward him and beginning to outline what needed to be done. His pen moved steadily, each note deliberate, each step clear. "We will start by reviewing the current ownership structure," he said, his voice calm, measured, as if this were just another routine adjustment. But it was not routine for me. It was a shift. A correction. I leaned forward slightly, my hands resting together in my lap, listening without interruption. The property is still under your primary control, he continued. You granted usage and partial rights, but not full ownership. That distinction matters. I let that sink in, repeating the words silently. Not full ownership. I had not given everything away. Not yet. However, he added, glancing up briefly, there are provisions that could allow that to change over time, depending on certain conditions. Those conditions can be modified. I nodded again, feeling the quiet alignment between what I had suspected and what was now being confirmed in precise language. Then I would like those conditions changed, I said, my voice even, without hesitation. He made another note, then pulled a different document from a drawer, placing it beside the others. We can restructure access, adjust authority, and clarify decision rights. It will require new signatures, and it will take effect immediately once filed. The word immediately stayed with me. Not someday. Not eventually. Immediately. I watched as he began marking sections of the document, crossing out lines that no longer applied, adding language that tightened what had once been left open. There was no anger in the process, no sense of retaliation. It was precise. Controlled. Necessary. I will also recommend updating your will, he said after a moment, his tone shifting slightly, more careful now. To ensure that your intentions are clearly reflected moving forward. I considered that, not as a reaction to what had happened at the party, but as a continuation of the same realization. Clarity was not something that could be assumed. It had to be written, defined, protected. Yes, I said quietly. That should be updated as well. He nodded and continued working, the sound of his pen against the paper steady, consistent, grounding in a way that felt almost reassuring. Time passed without urgency, each step building on the last, each decision reinforcing the one before it. I answered his questions simply, directly, without over-explaining. There was no need to revisit the past in detail. The present was clear enough. When he finished drafting the initial changes, he turned the document toward me, giving me a moment to read through it carefully. I adjusted my glasses and began at the top, moving line by line, not skimming, not assuming. Every word mattered now. Every clause. Every condition. Where there had once been openness, there was now structure. Where there had been trust, there was now definition. I reached the final page and paused, my eyes resting on the space where my signature would go. It did not feel heavy. It did not feel difficult. It felt right. I picked up the pen and signed my name slowly, deliberately, the ink settling into the paper with a quiet finality. Mr. Collins took the document, reviewed it once more, then placed it neatly into a folder. I will have this filed today, he said. You will receive confirmation by the end of the week. I nodded, standing up as he did, the movement smooth, unhurried. As I gathered my things, I noticed something I had not felt in a long time. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Something steadier than that. Control. Not over other people. Not over their choices. But over my own. I thanked him, and he walked me to the door, his expression professional, respectful, unchanged. Outside, the air felt different again, not because it had shifted, but because I had. I walked to my car, the folder now lighter in my hands, even though its contents had grown more defined. And as I drove away, there was no need to look back, no need to reconsider what had been done. The decision had already been made, not in that office, but the moment I realized I had been standing at a table where my name no longer belonged. This was simply the part where I responded. 3 days passed. Before anything changed on their side, and even then, it did not begin with a conversation, or an apology, or any acknowledgement of what had happened at the party. It began with a call. I was in my living room when the phone rang, the late afternoon light stretching across the floor in long, quiet lines, the kind that made everything feel still and deliberate. I glanced at the screen before answering. Daniel. I let it ring once more before picking up, not out of hesitation, but out of choice. Hello, I said, my voice calm, steady, the same tone I had carried with me since that afternoon. There was a pause on the other end, just long enough to suggest that he was not entirely sure how to begin. Mom, he said finally, his voice lower than usual, less certain. Did something change with the house? I did not respond immediately. I let the question settle, not because I needed time to think, but because I wanted him to hear the silence, to feel the absence of the easy reassurance I used to offer without question. What do you mean? I asked, evenly. Another pause. I could almost hear him adjusting his thoughts, trying to find the right words. Ashley tried to access the account this morning, he said. There were restrictions. New ones. And the property documents, they looked different. I walked toward the window, looking out at the quiet street, the same steady view that had not changed, unlike everything else. Yes, I said simply. They are. The line went quiet again, longer this time. Not confusion. Realization. Why? He asked, the word coming out softer than I expected, not defensive, not confrontational, just uncertain. I considered the question, not searching for an answer, but deciding how much of the truth I needed to give. Because I reviewed what I had signed, I said. And I made adjustments. There was a shift in his breathing, a subtle change that carried more weight than anything he had said so far. Mom, we were not trying to, he started, then stopped himself, the sentence left unfinished, as if even he was not sure how to complete it without revealing more than he intended. I did not interrupt. I did not help him finish. I simply waited. It is just. Ashley handles most of that, he continued after a moment. His tone careful now. It made things easier. Easier. The same word. I closed my eyes briefly, not in frustration, but in recognition. Yes, I said quietly. I heard that. He did not respond right away. The silence that followed was different this time, heavier, more aware. You were there, he asked, his voice tightening slightly. Yes, I replied. I was there. I did not say more. I did not need to. The memory of that afternoon, of the table, of the missing name, of the quiet conversation by the side of the house, was already enough. Mom, it was not supposed to, he began again, but the words lost their direction before they could fully form. I opened my eyes and looked out at the street once more, the stillness unchanged, grounding. Daniel, I said, gently, not raising my voice, not adding weight to the moment. I did not make any changes out of anger. That was true. Completely true. I made them because I understood something I had not understood before. He did not argue. He did not question that. Instead, he exhaled slowly, the sound carrying through the line in a way that felt almost unfamiliar. So what does this mean? He asked. I turned slightly, resting my hand against the window frame, feeling the solid surface beneath my fingers. It means, I said, my voice steady, that what is mine will remain mine. And what I choose to share will be decided clearly, not assumed. The words were simple, but they held more than they needed to explain. There was no anger in them. No accusation. Just definition. On the other end of the line, Daniel was quiet again, and this time, I did not fill the silence. I let it stay exactly as it was, allowing him to sit with it, to understand it in his own way. Because for the first time, that responsibility was no longer mine. After the call ended, I placed the phone back on the table without looking at it again, as if the conversation had already served its purpose and did not need to linger any longer. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that no longer felt empty, but complete. I moved slowly through the house, not out of hesitation, but because there was no longer any urgency attached to anything I needed to do. For years, I had measured my time around their needs, their schedules, their comfort. Now, the rhythm belonged entirely to me. Later that evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the light fade from the sky, the color softening into something calm and steady. My thoughts did not race. They did not circle back to the party or the missing chair or the quiet laughter that had followed Ashley's words. Those moments had already settled into their place, not as wounds, but as answers. I heard my phone vibrate once on the table beside me, then again a few minutes later. I did not reach for it immediately. When I finally did, I saw Ashley's name. One message. Then another. I opened the first. "I think there has been a misunderstanding." The second followed quickly. "We should talk about this." I read them both without reacting, my expression unchanged, my breath steady. There was no apology. No acknowledgement. Just an attempt to regain control of something that had shifted beyond her reach. I set the phone back down without replying. Not out of avoidance, but because there was nothing left to clarify. Everything had already been made clear. The next morning, I received confirmation from Mr. Collins that the documents had been filed, the changes now official, no longer just intentions written on paper, but decisions that carried weight and consequence. I read the message once, then closed it, placing the phone aside as I stood up and walked into the kitchen. The sunlight was stronger that day, filling the space with a brightness that felt almost new, even though it had always been there. I opened the cabinet and took out a plate, then another, setting them on the counter with quiet precision. I was not preparing for guests. I was not expecting anyone. I was simply moving through my space with a sense of presence I had not allowed myself before. Days passed without further calls from Daniel. The messages from Ashley stopped after that second one, as if silence had finally replaced the assumption that things would return to how they were. They did not. I did not reach out. I did not explain. There was nothing left that required my voice. One afternoon, as I was organizing a drawer I had not opened in years, I came across an old photograph. It was from a birthday, long ago, when Ethan was younger, sitting at a table with a cake that leaned slightly to one side, candles uneven, decorations imperfect. I was in that photo, standing just behind him, my hand resting lightly on his shoulder, my presence natural, unquestioned. I looked at it for a moment, not with sadness, but with understanding. That moment had been real. It had existed fully, without condition. But it had also passed, replaced by something else, something that no longer included me in the same way. I placed the photograph back in the drawer, closing it gently, not hiding it, not holding on to it, just letting it remain where it belonged. That evening, I returned to the window once more, the same place I had stood before, the same quiet street stretching out ahead. Nothing outside had changed. The houses were the same. The light was the same. But I was not. I no longer looked at that view with the expectation of being called back into something that had already let me go. I simply observed it, present, steady, complete on my own terms. And in that stillness, I understood something that no one had needed to say out loud. They had not forgotten me. They had chosen to remove me. And I had done the same, not with noise, not with anger, but with a clarity that could not be undone. I did not need a seat at their table anymore. I had already taken back my place where it mattered.